Hello everybody. In my discussion post, I labeled this video as how I fell back in love with soccer. But I forgot to mention one thing. I haven't really played soccer all that much these past few years. It might sound kind of strange how I fell back in love with a sport despite not really playing it, but here's how. From my childhood, from ages 8 to 18, soccer consumed me. It was my favorite sport to play as a kid. It was my favorite sport to watch as a kid. Soccer was everything to me when I was a child. Eventually, when I got to college, I wasn't really talented enough to go pro or to keep pursuing it D1. And so I kind of just dropped it and I focused on school. Eventually, focusing on school didn't really work out, and I ended up dropping out after a few quarters. Eventually, since I had no time and I had a lot of resources, I ended up picking up pretty bad addiction throughout my year-long absence from school. This addiction was sadly sports betting. Um, since I was very active in soccer, I watched a lot of soccer. I knew a lot of teams. My soccer knowledge transitioned into sports betting knowledge, and I would always bet on soccer, soccer, soccer. And eventually, I made a lot of money, but that's how they get you. They think you're gonna make all these thousands of dollars, and eventually they hook you, and that's how you get addicted to sports gambling. And I try to always be very cautious with my money that I betted on, but eventually it overflowed me, it overwhelmed me, and eventually I had to succumb to the addiction and I ended up losing a lot of money, unfortunately. It got so bad to the point where I had to borrow money from my mother. And at a certain point in that year long stint, my mother kept telling me why I kept borrowing so much money. And I had to come out clean because I knew I wasn't going to help myself by just keep borrowing money, and even though I wouldn't be able to repay it. Eventually, my mother sat me down and we talked it out. And she looked at me with the same face of disappointment from when I dropped out, but she also looked at me with the same face of acceptance. My mother has always been a key figure in my life, and luckily I had her in this moment of need, and she helped me break my pattern of addiction. She really helped me. She really emphasized me playing soccer and going back to what made me truly happy as I was when I was a child, and she signed me up for a soccer team with my brother. My brother basically helped me out too. My brother really put me in the soccer team, and he kind of just made me watch his games sometimes, go play with him on the weekends. I would train with him and everything. And eventually I noticed that there was a spot on that team where I can play, and I can play goalie. And so eventually the team took me in and they let me play goalie, and I played a whole season with them, and it was one of the funnest things I've ever experienced in life. Um, Eventually, this addiction that I had of sports gambling was just overflown by my commitment to soccer. And eventually, that's how I beat addiction. Distractions. Distractions would be your best friend when facing addictions. And that's how I learned how to beat my addiction. Just by distracting myself, basically.